My boat was too fast. Satoru grew smaller and smaller as I left him behind. Before I knew it, I'd lost sight of him, and I was alone, drifting across the ocean. That was the dream. I could hear Momoko rustling her covers as she turned to face me. Then she laughed for a moment. It's embarrassing, but when I woke up from that dream in my room at the hospital, I started crying, and I cried so much I couldn't believe it. I mean, I knew it was just a dream, but the tears kept coming, one after another. In the end, I was sobbing. I can't even remember the last time I cried before this. That's how rarely I cry. But that day I was just a total mess. I was so sad. It was unbearable. And then I knew I wanted to see Satoru again, no matter what. It's weird, don't you think? I don't think so. When I tried to imagine how lonely she must have felt then, I kept shaking my head. I couldn't see her going through something like that. It's definitely weird, Momoko declared, but that's why I came back, even though I still felt ashamed. So that's what happened. But you're still not planning on talking to my uncle about your illness? Nope, not planning on it, she replied flatly. Why not? At this point, I don't want to be a burden to him now. He's much stronger than you give him credit for. You're right. Of course he can handle it. That's not the issue. It's about his feelings. I can't do that to him. It wouldn't be fair after everything that's happened. But if you don't try to tell him... Momoko interrupted me before I could say, "You'll never know." I made my decision the moment I decided to come see him. But then you told me. I realized my voice was getting louder. I guess I wanted to tell someone after all, Momoko said softly. I just wanted to open up to someone, about leaving, about getting sick. And I knew that if I asked you not to tell Satoru, that you would keep my secret. That's not, I said, my voice breaking as I started to cry. That's not fair. You're right, it's not fair. I'm sorry, Takako. It made me so happy when you hugged me in the bath. I was truly happy. You're a really kind girl. That's why Satoru and I love you so much. I buried myself in the covers as tears ran down my cheeks. I kept repeating the words over and over again. It's not fair. It's not fair. Momoko kept saying she was sorry. But I went on repeating the phrase dozens of times, and I kept on going until at some point I cried myself out and fell asleep. The next morning, under an overcast sky, the innkeeper and Haru saw us off. Just as she had when we arrived, Momoko stood in the entryway and bowed formally to the innkeeper. The innkeeper laughed as she tried to get her to stop, but Momoko persisted. "See ya," Haru said casually and waved goodbye. Momoko was back to her usual cheerful self in the morning. On our descent, she talked cheerfully. "Oh, look, the lilies are blooming. The leaves are starting to show some colour over there." When I replied, I tried my best to be as cheerful as I could. I didn't know what else to do. We parted ways at Shinjuku Station that evening. With the crowds teeming around her, Momoko stood in front of the turnstile and bowed deeply to me. "Thank you, Takako," she said. "I had a really good time." The smile on her face was almost dazzling. Looking back at her, I took a risk and asked, "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going back to the bookshop." "No, that's not what I mean. I mean after that." Momoko said, and folded her arms. "I'll figure something out." That was all she said. Then she turned briskly on her heels and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there staring, even after I lost sight of her small figure in the crowd. I tried to imagine what might happen next, but the feelings it stirred up in me were more than I could bear. "Can we talk for a second?" I asked in a quiet voice, still staring at the ceiling. "Sure, I kind of feel like talking too." "It's about what you said this afternoon." "What were we talking about?" "Being sick?" "Oh, yeah." She had paused for a moment before she answered. Is it really bad?" I asked the question in one breath like I was reading a line from a script. My voice sounded so helpless in the dark. Yeah, if you think of it like that, it's pretty bad. But if you think about it another way, it's not so bad. What do you mean? Momoko drew out the sound until it became a groan. What I mean is, you know how there are people who die unexpectedly in an accident or from a sudden illness, and they never get the chance to say goodbye to anyone. Well, maybe, compared to them, I'm really fortunate. I still have time for all that. You mean, nah, it's nothing to get so worried about. It's not like I'm about to die right now or anything. A little while ago, I went into the hospital and they removed my uterus and did a bunch of other things. And now I'm going regularly to the hospital and they're figuring out my prognosis. I think it's just something I have to keep an eye on for the next few years. And is that why you went back to my uncle? It's not like I decided to come back as soon as I found out I was sick. The thought didn't even occur to me at first. But then I had this dream one day when I was in the hospital and feeling pretty depressed. A dream? I rolled over to face Momoko in the dark, but it was too dark to see the expression on her face. In the dream, I was on a boat that was right about to leave the harbour. No, actually, I think I might have been the boat. Anyway, I was paddling out toward the horizon. I could see all the way out there in the distance. I knew for certain that once I got there, I was never coming back. When I turned around, I saw a man standing in the harbour, waving at me. I could tell at a glance that it was Satoru. I had this feeling deep down that we would never see each other again, so I tried with all my might to wave back at him. But our second night was much quieter than the first. The guests we'd met the night before had already gone back down the mountain. In their place were a man and a woman who seemed to have just arrived that day. The couple talked quietly to each other through dinner. I found myself hating them. Why did they have to come to a boarding house like this place? They ought to be at one of those hot spring inns where they could do what they wanted and keep their relationship a secret. The innkeeper came in carrying a serving tray and discreetly turned on the fairly ancient television in the middle of the room. I think there was something wrong with the volume, because the sound of people laughing on screen would suddenly cut out, disappearing inside the cathode ray tube of the TV. When that happened, the room seemed even more silent than before. I found the way the sound cut out weirdly scary, and eventually I got up, went over to the TV and turned it off. We went back to our room and lay under the covers of our futons, side by side. Once we turned off the lights, it felt terribly quiet. The rain seemed to have stopped too. We could no longer hear the sound of rain falling in the distance. "Let's not rush to leave in the morning," Momoko said quietly. "That sounds good," I said, but my mind was elsewhere. I was staring up at the ceiling in the dark. Momoko had told me before that she couldn't sleep if there was even a small light on, so it was pitch black in the room. And yet, as I lay there with my eyes open, gradually getting used to the dark, I could make out the silhouettes of things in the room, however dimly. A moment later, I called out softly to Momoko, whom I knew had to be right next to me, though I couldn't see her. "Are you awake?" "Yeah." She answered right away, as if she was awake too.